Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. What was an uncanny, creepy, or terrifying moment in your life that felt, or feels in retrospect, like a scene right out of a thriller or a horror movie? Story 1. Voices in the Silence.
My wife and I had just checked into a hotel for the night. It was a small, quaint place, not much to look at, but it was quiet and seemed comfortable enough. After a long day of travel, we were exhausted. My wife was already fast asleep, her rhythmic breathing the only sound in the room. I lay beside her, staring at the darkened ceiling, my body heavy with fatigue, but my mind not quite ready to let go. As I began to drift into that liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, I heard it, a voice, soft and low, barely louder than a whisper. The words sent a jolt of ice down my spine. I think they are asleep now. I froze, my heart pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. The voice had come from inside the room. My mind raced, searching for an explanation, but fear took over. Someone was in the room with us. Adrenaline coursing through me, I sprang out of bed and turned on the lights, bathing the room in a harsh glow. My wife stirred but did not wake. I scanned every corner of the room with frantic eyes, searching for the source of the voice. I checked the bathroom. Empty. The shower. Nothing. I knelt to peer under the bed, my breath catching in my chest. Nothing there. The closet was the last place. My fingers trembled as I gripped the handle and swung it open. But the closet too was empty. I stood there, panting, staring at the room as if the walls themselves were hiding secrets. There was no one, no sign of any intruder, just my wife and me, alone in that silent room. For a moment I questioned everything I had heard. Was it real? Was it my imagination? Then it hit me. I remembered something I had read once about hypnagogic hallucinations, those vivid sensory experiences that can occur as you are falling asleep. They can feel so real, they blur the line between dreams and reality. It was the only explanation that made sense. But for those few minutes before reason reclaimed me, the terror was as real as it gets. Even now, thinking about it makes my skin crawl. Because hallucination or not, in that moment it felt like someone or something was watching us.
Story 2. Who is Larry?
Years ago, I was living in my first solo apartment. No roommates, just me. It was a small, cozy space, and I was thrilled to decorate it for Christmas. Among the decorations was a cherished nativity set that my mother had designed and made for me. I placed it on the floor right in front of my Christmas tree. At the last minute, I was able to book a flight to spend Christmas with my parents in another state. The holiday was wonderful, and I returned to my apartment feeling refreshed and happy. A few days later, there was an unexpected knock at my door. When I opened it, I found a man and a woman, both appearing to be in their mid-50s. Their faces registered immediate surprise upon seeing me. "Is Larry here?" the man asked. I was confused. "I am sorry, but I do not know anyone named Larry," I replied. The couple exchanged puzzled glances before insisting that Larry was their son and that this was his apartment. I assured them that I had been living there for months and no one named Larry had ever resided in the unit. Their confusion turned to disbelief. They told me that they had spent Christmas Day in this very apartment with Larry. Then the woman pointed to the spot where my tree and nativity set had been. "What happened to the beautiful custom-made nativity set that was here?" she asked. "Larry told me I could have it." I froze. How did they know about the nativity set? I had taken it down and put it away days ago. It was impossible for them to have seen it, yet they described it perfectly. Though I laughed off their claims, I could not shake the chill that settled over me. Over the next 3 years, I experienced strange, inexplicable events in that apartment. Looking back, I should have left sooner. To this day, I wonder who or what Larry really was.
Story 3. A Bridge to Terror.
It was a cold, wet winter night in the United Kingdom, and I was driving home late down a narrow country lane. The darkness was oppressive, the rain drumming relentlessly against the windshield, and the wind screeched through the trees like a wailing cry. The road was desolate, the kind of emptiness that makes you feel utterly alone. This lane had always made me uneasy, especially one particular spot, a small stone humpback bridge. It was steep, so steep that you could not see over the crest until you were halfway across. The bridge, raised over a stream, had thick stone walls on either side, creating an enclosed claustrophobic passage. As I approached, my headlights illuminated the slick stone of the bridge. Suddenly, movement caught my eye. Hundreds of mice, tiny darting shapes, were scurrying across the road from right to left, flooding the bridge's surface like a living wave. I gasped, slamming the brakes, and the car came to a jerky stop in the middle of the bridge. Heart pounding, I stared at the mass of creatures, unable to comprehend how they had appeared. The bridge's solid walls left no room for them to emerge or escape. I gripped the wheel, unsure whether to drive forward or reverse, when the air grew unnaturally cold. My breath misted in the car, and the rain seemed to fade into silence. That is when I saw it. Through the blur of the rain-slicked windshield, a figure emerged from the shadows on the bridge. It was pale, impossibly pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to sink into its skull. Its lips were thin and colorless, pulled into a grotesque, unnatural smile. The figure stood still, staring directly at me, unmoving as the mice swarmed around its feet. Then, in one horrifying instant, the mice began climbing the car, scratching and scrabbling against the metal. I was surrounded, trapped, frozen in terror. I blinked, and the figure was gone. The mice vanished just as suddenly, leaving only the rain and the empty bridge. I drove home that night in silence, unable to shake the memory of what I had seen. I have never crossed that bridge again.
Story 4. Coma that trapped me in terror.
I woke up in a hospital bed, paralyzed from head to toe. My body refused to move, no matter how desperately I tried. And when I opened my mouth to scream, no sound came out. My vocal cords were damaged, leaving me mute. The pain coursing through me was unbearable, a sharp reminder of how helpless I was. Without any explanation, I was given medication to dull the pain. What I did not know at the time was that the drug was ketamine, a powerful hallucinogen. My mind became a battleground, distorting reality in horrifying ways. In the nightmare world my mind created, I was no longer in a hospital. I believed I was strapped to a metal table in a secret, illegal experimentation facility. The nurses who tended to me appeared drenched in blood, their eyes hollow and soulless. The doctors wore featureless, sinister masks, their voices rising to ear-piercing screams that echoed endlessly in my head. I could not speak to explain my fear or beg for mercy. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to plead silently, my mind racing with terror. The nurses, oblivious to the horrors I was experiencing, seemed puzzled by my tears. They leaned closer, their blood-soaked forms towering over me, their distorted faces filling my vision. This nightmare continued for an agonizing week. Every moment felt like an eternity, each hallucination more vivid and horrifying than the last. I was trapped in a cycle of fear and helplessness, unable to distinguish reality from the terrifying illusions my mind created. When they finally stopped the ketamine, the hallucinations began to fade, but the memories were seared into my soul. Even now, 12 years later, I am haunted by the things I saw. Nightmares plague me, dragging me back to that hellish week. I will never touch a hallucinogenic drug again. I have been told that flashbacks are possible, and the thought of reliving that horror keeps me on edge. Every time I fall ill, a deep fear grips me. I refused to call an ambulance, no matter how severe the situation, terrified that I might wake up in that nightmare again.
Story 5. She was never there.
Late one winter evening, I found myself driving down an empty stretch of road. Snowflakes descended thickly, blanketing the world in a ghostly white. The only sounds were the faint hum of my car engine and the occasional crunch of tires against icy patches. A fog settled in, so dense it felt like I was driving through a dream. Halfway through the route, I spotted something ahead, a figure standing by the roadside. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or the drifting snow, but as I drew closer, I saw her clearly. She was a woman, clad in a pale dress that seemed far too thin for the biting cold. Her long, dark hair obscured most of her face, and she stood unnervingly still. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. Rolling down the window, I asked if she needed a ride. Without a word, she opened the passenger door and slipped inside. The chill she brought with her was unlike anything I had felt before. It was bone deep, as though the warmth of the car evaporated instantly. She said nothing, her head tilted slightly downward so that her hair continued to veil her face. Unease coiled tightly in my chest, but I tried to keep my focus on the road. It was when I glanced at the rearview mirror that the real terror began. Reflected, there was not just the woman but another figure seated directly behind me, a shadowy, indistinct form with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through me. My breath caught, and when I whipped my head around to look, the back seat was empty. The woman beside me turned her head slightly, her face still obscured, and whispered in a voice that seemed to echo, "You should not have stopped." Panic surged through me. My hands trembled as I tried to keep control of the wheel. Suddenly, the radio, which had been off, crackled to life, emitting a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. The headlights flickered, casting strange, shifting shadows on the road ahead. When I dared to look again, the passenger seat was empty. The door was closed as if she had never been there, but the frost on the window bore the unmistakable imprint of a hand pressed from the inside.
Story 6. The Headless Sentinel.
On a serene trip to Alabama with my boyfriend's family, we decided to visit a hidden waterfall. The journey involved taking a jet ski across a shimmering lake and navigating a series of slippery rocks to reach the cascading water. It was picturesque, almost dreamlike, a moment of pure tranquility. However, tranquility has a way of unraveling. On the way back, I hesitated at the rocky path. The stones were slick, and my confidence in making it across without falling was slim. Spotting an alternate route through a shallow pool, I decided to wade around instead. It seemed safer, albeit longer. The pool was quiet, the water cool against my legs. As I moved forward, something caught my eye. About 10 feet ahead, perched atop a flat rock jutting out of the water, was a deer skull. Its bleached white surface gleamed under the sunlight, its hollow sockets fixed on me. It was eerie, but not entirely implausible. After all, deer were common in the area. Still, the sight sent a shiver up my spine. I turned my gaze away, intending to move on, but something beneath the water made me freeze. There, in the shallows, stood the body of a deer, headless. Its form was fully intact, fur matted and darkened from the water. There was no blood, no visible wound, just the macabre figure standing upright, its legs swaying gently with the current. My breath caught as dread pooled in my stomach. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding like a drumbeat in my ears. A part of me wanted to believe it was a cruel prank, perhaps an unfortunate accident, but the stillness of the woods and the unnatural posture of the body told me otherwise. The water seemed colder now, biting into my skin as I tried to retreat. Then the ripples changed. It was as if the pool itself came alive. tiny waves lapping around the headless body, as though something unseen had disturbed it. The figure swayed again, this time more deliberately. That was enough. I stumbled back toward the rocks, slipping and scraping my knees, but I did not care. When I finally reached the jet ski, breathless and trembling, I could not bring myself to look back. I never told anyone what I saw, but sometimes I wake up hearing the sound of water lapping gently against a shore and feel those hollow sockets watching me again.
Story 7. Town of Glowing Eyes.
In the summer of 2006, I was part of a small drum corps on tour in Texas. We traveled in 3 15-passenger vans, navigating the state with printed directions from MapQuest. This was before the convenience of GPS, so detours and wrong turns were not uncommon. One night, around 2 a.m., we were driving along a small 2-lane highway in central Texas when the driver suddenly realized we were no longer on a paved road. The smooth asphalt had given way to gravel, then dirt. None of us knew how we had ended up there, but we pressed on, hoping to find a way back to the main road. We eventually pulled into a trailer town, a small dark collection of campers and mobile homes. It was eerily silent, with no streetlights or signs of life. The only light came from a glowing mosquito trap inside a 2-story brick building that resembled a convenience store. As we crawled along the dirt road, we noticed something strange, pairs of glowing red and orange eyes surrounding us. At first, they were scattered, but as the high beams swept across the town, we saw them everywhere. Hundreds of eyes reflected back at us. The driver turned on the high beams, and the sight froze us in our seats. The entire town was covered in deer. They were perched on trailers, standing in yards, atop parked cars and campers, and lining the dirt road. Not one of them moved. They did not scratch the ground, twitch their ears, or even blink. As our vans inched forward, the deer followed us with their heads, their unbroken stares drilling into us. The air felt heavy, and the silence was deafening. There were no people, no lights, no sounds of televisions or murmurs from inside the trailers. Despite their numbers and their unnatural stillness, the deer never blocked our path. Slowly, we made our way out of the trailer town and back onto a paved road. We reached civilization by sunrise, shaken and unable to explain what we had seen. Years later, the memory still haunts me. We used to joke that the deer were the town's residents, transformed by night into their ungulate forms. But deep down, we all knew there was something far darker at play in that silent, haunted town.
Story 8. The Flickering Candle.
It happened one summer evening when I was home alone. The air was thick with humidity, and a thunderstorm brewed in the distance. I had always hated storms. The way they seemed to charge the air with static sent shivers down my spine. Around 10 p.m., the power went out. The sudden silence was deafening. No hum of the refrigerator, no soft buzz of the ceiling fan, just the muffled rumble of thunder and the occasional creak of the house settling. I lit a single candle and settled onto the couch, trying to distract myself with a book. That was when I heard it, a faint rhythmic tapping. It came from the hallway, just out of sight. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Tapping, tap, tap, tap. It could have been anything, I told myself. The storm, the pipes, maybe even a branch against the window. But as I listened, the sound grew closer, more deliberate. I mustered the courage to peek into the hallway. The flickering candlelight barely reached the end of the corridor where shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. I called out, my voice wavering. "Hello?" No response. I stepped closer, holding the candle in front of me. The shadows at the end of the hallway seemed to deepen, coalescing into a form, a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its limbs stretched in ways that defied anatomy. Its head tilted unnaturally, as though studying me. Before I could move, the candle flickered violently and went out, plunging me into darkness. My heart raced as I stumbled backward, desperate to relight it. The tapping resumed, now just feet away. I lit the candle again with trembling hands. The hallway was empty. The shadows were gone. But as I turned back to the couch, I saw them. Imprints of damp, elongated footprints tracked across the floor, leading right to where I had been sitting.
Story 9. Shadow Beyond the River.
The storm was unrelenting as we drove through Kansas, rain hammering the windshield like a relentless drumbeat. My then girlfriend and I were on our way to visit her father, but the main route was blocked by severe flooding. A glance at the map revealed an alternate route, a series of back roads winding through desolate farmland. Desperate to keep moving, we took the detour. The back road was narrow and poorly lit, the headlights barely cutting through the sheet of rain. The world outside was pitch black, the occasional flash of lightning illuminating skeletal trees and endless water pooling on either side of the road. As we approached what should have been a bridge, we slowed down, squinting to see through the torrent. The road seemed to disappear ahead, swallowed by darkness. Before we could decide whether to proceed, a long flash of lightning lit up the scene. The bridge was submerged. Water roared over it like a living thing, and the road on either side dropped off into a vast, churning lake. My breath caught as I realized how close we had come to driving straight into the water. The next moment, something shifted in the car. The temperature plummeted, and our breath fogged the glass. A sickly sweet smell, like rotting flowers, filled the air. My girlfriend gripped my arm, her eyes wide with terror. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Ahead, just beyond the bridge, stood a figure. It was tall and gaunt, its silhouette barely visible in the rain. Lightning flashed again, and for a split second, I saw it clearly. Its face was hollow, like a cracked porcelain mask, with deep, empty eyes and a twisted grin that seemed carved into its skin. It stood motionless, yet its presence radiated malice. The figure raised a long, spindly hand, pointing directly at us. Then the radio crackled to life with static, a garbled voice whispering something incomprehensible. The headlights flickered, and the car engine sputtered. Panicking, I threw the car into reverse and sped back the way we came, the entity growing smaller in the rearview mirror until it was swallowed by the darkness. We never spoke about what we saw that night, but I often dream of that bridge and the figure waiting just beyond it, pointing, as if daring us to return.
Story 10. Scratches in the Night.
It happened one quiet autumn evening. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and I was home alone, savoring the rare solitude. My parents had gone out of town, leaving me with a small list of chores and the promise of takeout when they returned. The house felt still, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floors and the hum of the refrigerator. I was curled up on the couch, flipping through a book, when a faint sound caught my attention. It was subtle, like the rustle of leaves, but it seemed too close to the house. I paused, listening intently. Nothing. Dismissing it as the wind, I returned to my book. Moments later, there it was again, louder this time. A scratching sound, like nails lightly dragging across glass. My heart raced as I turned toward the living room window. The curtains were half closed, leaving just enough of a gap to see out into the dark yard. I hesitated, convincing myself it was probably a tree branch swaying in the wind. But as I approached the window, the scratching abruptly stopped. Peering out, I saw nothing but the faint outline of the trees. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, looking more uneasy than I wanted to admit. With a nervous chuckle, I pulled the curtains shut, convincing myself I was being paranoid. An hour later, I decided to head upstairs. As I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs, I glanced toward the large bay window at the end of the hallway. My heart stopped. A face was pressed against the glass, pale, expressionless, and too gaunt to belong to anyone I knew. Its eyes were dark pits, fixed directly on me. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Frozen in terror, I fumbled for my phone, but when I looked back, the face was gone. I locked myself in my room, my hands trembling as I called the police. They found no one outside and no signs of a break-in, but on the window, faintly etched in the condensation, were long, thin lines, like fingers dragged across the glass. I never stayed home alone again.
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight and remember, not all shadows are empty.